My mom called me at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. The moment I saw her name on my screen, my stomach tightened. Nobody calls that early to share good news. I answered immediately, and before she even finished explaining what was happening, I already knew where the conversation was headed. It was about my younger sister, Danielle. She was in trouble again, and just like every other time, everyone expected me to fix it. This wasn't anything new. It had been happening for years. Danielle was 3 years younger than me, and ever since we were kids, she had always been the favorite. She was praised for the smallest accomplishments, spoiled with gifts, and excused whenever she made a mistake. I, on the other hand, was expected to be responsible, patient, and selfless. If Danielle broke something, it was an accident. If I made a mistake, it was a disappointment. If she failed a class, she needed support. If I earned straight A's, I was simply doing what was expected of me. For a long time, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was jealous. But as the years passed, the difference became impossible to ignore. When I was 16, I got my first part-time job because I wanted to save for college. I felt proud of earning my own money, never imagining that paycheck would eventually turn me into my family's personal financial safety net. At first, the requests were small. An overdue bill, a prescription that couldn't wait, an unexpected expense. I never said no because I genuinely wanted to help. But as my career grew and my finances improved, the requests grew right along with them. I worked hard, built a stable life, and finally reached a point where I could breathe financially. Danielle, however, seemed stuck in an endless cycle of quitting jobs, abandoning projects, and spending more than she earned. Every time the consequences of her choices caught up with her, my parents came to me. She needed help paying rent. She had another debt to cover. Her car needed repairs. She wanted money to start yet another business she was convinced would change her life. There was always another emergency, and somehow every emergency ended with money leaving my account. What hurt wasn't the money itself. It was the fact that nobody seemed to appreciate what it took to earn it. My parents never asked if helping would put me in a difficult position. They never wondered what I had to sacrifice before sending those transfers. They simply assumed I would always figure something out because I was the responsible daughter. The more successful I became, the more responsibilities they quietly placed on my shoulders, while Danielle continued receiving sympathy for every bad decision she made. One evening, I decided to look through years of bank statements. At first, it was nothing more than curiosity. I wanted to know how much I had actually contributed over the years. When I finished adding everything together, I just stared at the number on my screen. I could barely breathe. The amount was enough for a down payment on a house. Enough to make a serious investment in my future. Enough to completely change my life. That's when I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't simply helping my family anymore. I had become their personal ATM. For weeks, I tried to push that realization aside. I reminded myself that family helps family, that love sometimes requires sacrifice, and that supporting the people you care about is simply what good daughters do. But that Tuesday morning phone call changed everything. Danielle had lost another job. According to my mother, it was because her boss didn't appreciate her talent. I'd heard that explanation countless times before. Every employer was unfair. Every landlord was unreasonable. Every coworker was jealous. Every customer was impossible. Every bank was greedy. The whole world seemed responsible for Danielle's problems. Everyone except Danielle herself. As my mom kept talking, I already knew what was coming. She wanted me to cover several months of Danielle's rent until she found another job. Normally, quick favor before we continue. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week I share true family stories filled with betrayal, difficult choices, shocking secrets, and moments that completely change people's lives. If that's the kind of content you enjoy, You're going to love what's coming next. So, here's what happened. I would have agreed before she even finished tasking. This time, I surprised both of us. I quietly told her I needed some time to think about it. Silence filled the line. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that tells you someone can't believe what they just heard. They weren't used to hearing maybe from me. Later that week, I traveled back to my hometown for work and decided to stop by my parents' house for dinner. I expected a peaceful evening with my family, but instead I walked into yet another reminder of why nothing ever changed. The moment Danielle arrived, she started talking excitedly about future vacations, expensive restaurants she wanted to try, and new classes she planned to take. Listening to her, you'd never guess she wasn't employed or unable to pay her rent. What surprised me even more was watching my parents nod along as though every one of those plans sounded perfectly reasonable. Halfway through dinner, my mom brought up the financial help in front of everyone. Smiling politely, she said she hoped I could do what I always do because the family really needed me right now. Danielle didn't look embarrassed. She didn't apologize. She simply looked at me with complete confidence, waiting for my answer as if it had already been decided. That was the moment something clicked inside me. For the first time, I realized that no one at that table saw helping as my choice anymore. They saw it as my obligation. After dinner, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. I needed a break from the uncomfortable atmosphere inside the house. As I walked toward the backyard, I heard voices coming from the patio. Danielle was talking to one of her friends, and neither of them realized I was close enough to hear. At first, I paid little attention, but then I caught my name. I froze. Danielle was laughing. She told her friend that I always ended up paying because I was too responsible to ever refuse. Her friend asked if she didn't feel guilty about depending on me so much. Danielle laughed again and said she didn't. As long as I believed it was my job to save everyone, she had no reason to stop letting me. Then she added something that hurt even more. She said our parents would never hold her accountable because they had always favored her. In that instant, everything finally made sense. For years, I had convinced myself she was simply struggling or having bad luck. But hearing those words made me realize she knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't about needing help anymore. It was about choosing the easier path because someone else was always willing to carry the burden. That night, I drove home feeling strangely calm. I wasn't angry anymore, and I wasn't even sad. What I felt was clarity. For the first time, I could see my life without making excuses for anyone. I had postponed vacations, delayed investments, and sacrificed personal goals so I could continue paying for someone else's irresponsible decisions. The most painful part wasn't the money I had lost. It was realizing that none of it had ever been appreciated. My generosity had stopped being seen as kindness years ago. It had quietly become an expectation. 2 days later, my mom called again. She didn't ask how I was doing or whether work had gone well. Her first question was when I planned to send the money. I took a deep breath before answering and simply said, "I'm not." For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then everything exploded. She accused me of abandoning my family, reminded me of everything my parents had done for me growing up, and insisted that Danielle was going through an incredibly difficult time. She told me family should always stand by each other, especially during moments like this. I listened without interrupting. When she finally finished, I calmly repeated the exact same answer. I wasn't sending the money. The reaction was even worse than I expected. Over the next several days, my phone barely stopped ringing. My parents kept calling. Danielle sent long messages accusing me of turning my back on her. Even relatives I hardly ever spoke to suddenly felt entitled to judge my decision. Some called me selfish. Others claimed that success had changed me. A few even suggested I thought I was better than everyone else because I had managed to build a comfortable life. What fascinated me was that not a single one of those people volunteered to help Danielle with their own money. Apparently, Generosity was only expected when it came from me. The following weeks were uneasy. Danielle stopped speaking to me completely, and my parents barely responded whenever I reached out. More than once, I questioned whether I had made the right decision. I'd spent so many years playing the role of the family's rescuer that saying no felt almost unnatural. But every time guilt crept in, I remembered what I'd heard on that patio. I remembered Danielle laughing about taking advantage of me because she knew I would never refuse. That conversation became the reminder I needed whenever I felt tempted to give in. About 3 months later, something happened that surprised everyone. Danielle found a job. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't the career she'd always dreamed of, but it was steady. Before long, she moved into an apartment with a roommate to lower her expenses, sold things she no longer needed, and slowly started paying off her debts. Watching those changes forced me to face a painful truth. My financial support had never solved my sister's problems. It had only delayed her growth. As long as someone kept rescuing her, she had no reason to become responsible for her own life. For years, I'd confused love with sacrifice and support with dependency. Even as Danielle slowly became more independent, my relationship with my parents only grew colder. My mom rarely called anymore, and when she did, she always found a way to remind me how disappointed she was. My dad spoke less than usual, but I could hear his disapproval in every conversation. It felt as though my family had forgotten every sacrifice I'd made for them. One single no had erased a lifetime of saying yes. Somehow, after everything I'd done, I had become the villain. Then one quiet Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. It was my dad. The moment I answered, I noticed something different in his voice. He sounded emotionally exhausted, like someone who had been carrying a burden for far too long. After a few minutes of small talk, he finally admitted why he'd called. The truth is, we're struggling. Hearing those words from him was almost shocking. My father had always been the strong one, the person who never admitted weakness. He explained that over the years they had slowly drained their savings trying to keep Danielle afloat. Every time she lost a job, they stepped in. Every unpaid bill became their responsibility. Every financial crisis convinced them she just needed one more chance. But every rescue only led to another emergency. Little by little, the money they'd spent decades saving disappeared. I finally asked the question neither of us had ever dared to ask. How much have you spent? He hesitated for several seconds before answering. When he finally told me the amount, I closed my eyes. Between my parents' savings and everything I had contributed over the years, the total was enough to completely change several lives. It represented years of hard work, sacrifices, postponed dreams, canceled vacations, and opportunities none of us would ever get back. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, my dad sighed. We thought we were helping her, he said quietly. We kept believing she just needed a little more time. A little more support. But maybe we were only making things worse. Those words stayed with me. For years, I dreamed of someone in my family finally understanding why I'd reached my breaking point. Yet when that moment finally came, I didn't feel satisfaction. I only felt sadness. There was nothing rewarding about watching the people I loved realize how much damage had been done. We spent the next hour talking more honestly than we ever had before. We spoke about how love can slowly turn into enabling without anyone realizing it, and how protecting someone from every consequence can quietly prevent them from growing. Before hanging up, I told him something I wished all of us had understood years earlier. Sometimes helping someone too much keeps them from becoming the person they're capable of being. He stayed silent for a moment before answering, I think you're right. Over the following months, those words slowly became reality. Danielle kept her job, learned to manage her expenses, and stopped expecting someone else to solve every problem that came her way. It wasn't easy, and she still had difficult days, but she was finally taking responsibility for her own life. At the same time, My parents had to face the consequences of years of financial decisions driven by guilt instead of wisdom. They cut back on spending, postponed plans, and became much more careful with money. Watching them struggle wasn't easy because I loved them, and I always would. But deep down, I knew this was the first honest chapter our family had experienced in years. For the first time, no one was pretending anymore. Nearly a year after that early morning phone call, my mom invited me to another family gathering. I stared at the message before replying. Part of me wanted to say no. The last few family dinners had ended in disappointment, and I wasn't sure I was ready to walk back into that house pretending everything was fine. But another part of me wondered if enough time had passed for things to finally change. In the end, I accepted, reminding myself that showing up didn't mean forgetting the past. The atmosphere felt different the moment I stepped inside. For the first time in years, no one greeted me with awkward jokes about money or subtle reminders that I was the responsible one. Dinner felt surprisingly peaceful. We talked about work, funny memories, everyday life, and future plans. Danielle mentioned her job, laughed about a mistake she had made at work, and even joked about learning to budget. It wasn't perfect, but it felt genuine. The biggest difference was what never happened. No one asked me for money. No one hinted at financial problems. For the first time in years, I wasn't sitting at that table wondering what they were going to ask me for next. After dinner, everyone stepped outside except my mom. She quietly asked if I could stay behind for a minute. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table where so many difficult conversations had happened over the years. She stared down at her hands for several seconds before finally looking at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Those words caught me completely off guard. She admitted they had taken everything I did for granted. They leaned on me because they knew I would always come through, never stopping to ask how much it was costing me. Then she confessed something that explained everything. For years, they had treated Danielle as though she were too fragile to face the consequences of her own choices. They believed they were protecting her, but somewhere along the way they had only taught her that someone else would always rescue her. Listening to my mom, I realized they hadn't acted out of cruelty. They had acted out of fear, guilt, and a kind of love that had slowly become unhealthy. That realization didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me let go of years of resentment. I reached across the table and held her hand. I thanked her for finally being honest, but I also told her something that needed to be said. I loved my family, and I always would, but loving them could never again mean sacrificing myself. If a real emergency happened, I would always be there. I'd offer support, advice, and help however I reasonably could. What I would never do again was become everyone's financial safety net simply because I had been reliable in the past. She nodded quietly. There were no excuses. No arguments. For the first time in years, it felt like she truly understood. As I was leaving that evening, Danielle followed me onto the front porch. We stood there in silence before she finally spoke. She admitted she'd spent months believing I had abandoned her when she needed me most. But after holding a steady job, paying her own bills, and dealing with life's problems without expecting someone else to fix them, she'd started seeing things differently. She looked down before saying something I never thought I'd hear. I depended on everyone for far too long. It wasn't a perfect apology, and it didn't erase the past. But it was honest. For someone who had spent years blaming everyone else, taking responsibility for her own choices was a bigger step than I ever expected to witness. Driving home that night, I kept thinking about the person I used to be. I believed love meant endless sacrifice. I believed my worth came from fixing other people's problems. I thought setting boundaries was selfish. Now I know the opposite is true. Healthy boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which relationships are strong enough to survive honesty. My family didn't become perfect overnight. We still have disagreements, and some wounds will always take time to heal. But today our relationship is built on honesty. accountability, and mutual respect instead of guilt and dependency. Ironically, the day I stopped trying to save everyone else was the day our family finally had a chance to heal. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't rescuing the people you care about. Sometimes it's trusting them enough to stand on their own. Looking back, I don't regret helping my family when they truly needed me. What I regret is waiting so long to realize that constantly rescuing someone can keep them from ever growing. The day I stopped being my family's personal ATM wasn't the day I abandoned them. It was the day I finally stopped abandoning myself. So now I'd love to hear from you. If you had spent years financially supporting a sibling who refused to take responsibility for their own life, would you have kept helping, or would you have drawn the same line I did? Tell me what you would have done in my place. I read every comment, and I genuinely love to hear your perspective.